Good viewer, you are watching Exert Us. This is because Exert Us makes you feel good, makes you feel fulfilled. You are enjoying this. You will continue to watch Exert Us for a long time to come. You want to subscribe to Exert Us, and you will. You will like and subscribe and share. You will tell your friends. Tell your friends about Exert Us. Your friends will come to like Exert Us, much as you are liking this right now, as we speak. Thank you for subscribing to Exert Us. See, that was easy.
Hey, everybody, tune in to Recent Tartarians.
Recent Tartarians. Recent Tartarians. totalitarian. Recent totalitarian. Recent totalitarian.
Hey, everybody, tune in to Recent Tartarians.
Recent totalitarians. Recent totalitarian.
Bonsoir, coach de soir. Yeah, good to have you all. This is Naropa, but this time it's more French because we have Didier Lacapelle. Did I get it right?
Well said.
No. I was almost. I think I speak
Lacapelle.
Lacapelle. It's like an Italian Californian. We're way worse than Canadians, so I apologize. I'll try not to speak too much French at you, but you can tell us a bit about your life and your research. What is it that brings you here? Good to meet you.
Well, my name is Didier for you and for all of you around. And I'm going to talk about calendars and the way they appeared. But when I prepared it, I saw I could bring everything in place around the calendars, and the whole story of humanity came. So maybe we'll digress a lot, I think, and I try not to be too long. I've got 60 slides or something like that.
All right. Well, before we start, I mean, because amazingly enough, we've already gotten a super chat here. Well, David says execute order 66. I think we're going to save that for later, but I appreciate the incentive. Thank you. Well, this is your presentation here, and it's about chronology and calendars, different calendar systems. Awesome.
Okay. It's not very graphic. I don't have much photographs. Bit austere, I think, but I didn't have much time to prepare. I think it will be enjoyable, at least. I must start with the trouble with geography, because many names will come in the presentation, but they change. The meaning has changed many times during history. So I've got to say we have two Roman empires. One is south of Europe. It's the antique Roman Empire, everyone knows about. It was divided after a time between Western Roman Empire and Eastern Roman Empire. The names we're going to use are Judah for the Western Roman Empire, mainly France, Spain, Northern Italy. And the Eastern Roman Empire is, of course, as everyone knows, Greece. And we have another Roman Empire that came very later. In the course of history, it's the Holy Roman Empire of the 10th century to 1806, I think. It is north of Europe. It just fits the frontiers of the Southern Roman Empire, and it is Israel. But both of them want to be the Roman Empire, but they were at war with each other. The war between the Pope and the Emperor, everyone knows about. And Greeks call themselves Roman, so it will be very complicated. What Rome are we talking about? And I must say, I'm not absolutely certain that when Rome comes in the story, it will be the Rome I expected. Maybe I made a mistake, and I think it is the Italian Rome, though it was the Grecian Rome, Constantinople, or maybe it's Moscow, maybe another city I didn't know of. We have same problem with the Gauls, because when we look at the maps, Gaul is modern France, and that's the way Julius Caesar presented it. The Gauls are the Celts of modern France.
You definitely look Gaulish, by the way.
We have a guy whose name is Diodorus Siculus, who said that Caesar was wrong. The Gauls are not the Celts, they are the Germans. And when we look at books of the Roman Catholic Bible that are first and second book of Maccabees, it spoke of the Hasidim of Galilee, that are the troops, the army of Judah Maccabee. We have Hasidim, that is a Jewish sect created in the 18th century in Germany. Honestly, they were a bit more ancient. They came over in the 17th century, the time of Judah Maccabee, the very beginning of the 17th century. And they were not the modern Jewish sect, which is peaceful and very religion-oriented. The Hasidim were warriors at first. And this Galilee is Germany. So Diodorus Siculus is maybe right. And Caesar was wrong.
Well, the Hasidics were warriors, but also, I mean, Hasid means like piety, right? So it's also, they were very like religious. The Hasidic Jews were very religious as well.
And we have a problem with the term.
Did he freeze or is he okay?
Yes, I think
Oh,
so.
okay. Hold on one second. Please stand by. Yeah. It is true though that the Hasidic Jewish movement started sometime in the 17th century, which is I find interesting. Even though there are older movements of Judaism.
Yeah, overall, it certainly always seems to be the issue with all of this history and so many other things, the relabeling, the constant relabeling of things. You never know what you're talking about. Didier, now you're back. Please continue.
Oh, sorry.
Your camera froze for about half a minute, 1 minute.
You froze right about at the beginning of, at the end of your Hasidic moment.
Yeah, and we have the Jews. When you read the book 1 and 2 of Maccabees, they constantly switch from the word Israel to the word Judah, meaning it's the same thing. But it's not the same thing. In the Bible, we have two different countries. When the great Israel is divided, it was two countries, one country of Israel and one country is Judah. And when you read Apocalypse, the author of Apocalypse to John, you call it Revelation in English, I think, it speaks of those who claim they are Jews but are not. In fact, they speak of Israeli people who are the cult of Osiris, the Egyptian god. They claim to be Jews, but in the sense of a Western guy who's the author of Revelation, the Jews are the people of Judah. So the Jews are Western. How can a guy from the Eastern Europe can call himself a Jew? But it's the way the author of the Quran, Muhammad, as it said, is of the opinion of those who say they are Jews but are not, because he wanted to unite the cult of the Messiah of the Jews, who we call Osiris, who's Osiris with the Greek domination, and Isa, who's the Messiah of the Nazarenes. And when you read the Quran, you see that the Isa of Revelation is not the Isa of the Gospels, because he is born again, he resurrects at the end of time, and is a warlike figure because he fights the Antichrist. And it did not. Am I still here?
Yeah, you are. We're just trying to give you more of an emphasis.
I don't have. Okay. He did not resuscitate after 3 days, as in the Roman cult. And when you look at the Lamentation of Jeremiah, the book is sometimes called Lamentation, sometimes Book of Jeremiah. He spoke to the Jews that are refugees in Egypt, and he says, "You adore the Queen of Heaven, that's a cause of your chastisement. But who are these Jews if they are in Egypt?" And when we speak of the Greeks, of course, there's modern Greece in the eastern southern Europe, but there are Greeks in Anatolia, which is Turkey by now, and there are Greeks in Syria, which in the Book of Maccabees is Russia. Not modern Russia, but more like Ukraine in the north of the Black Sea. So it's something very complicated because there are Jews everywhere, Jews in the west, Jews in the east. Gaul, or sometimes in France, sometimes they're in Germany. And Greece is a very, very big territory. We've got to be aware of this because we don't always know what we are
Yeah,
talking
it would even
about.
count, like parts of North Africa, like you're showing. Anywhere in those Mediterranean, any place that is Hellenized is considering itself Greece for some reason.
Yeah. And for a general overview, I will share a time frame.
Just really
with
quickly,
the-
can I ask one question? Earlier, you were talking about Lamentations of John, I believe, or where
No.
were you?
The Lamentation is the book written by Jeremiah.
Jeremiah. So where is it saying that the Jews are coming? There's a group of pretend Jews or something that are coming from the cult of Osiris. Where did you find that
No,
from?
no, it is not said Osiris. It's said the Jews that are refugees in Egypt.
Have become part of the Asarsef cult of Osiris, or
He says they venerate the Queen of Heaven.
got it?
That's all
Okay.
we can. That's all we can know from it. And I have opinions, but
Okay.
that's not in the book.
Okay. Continue. Sorry.
The time frame is the 17th century because the book were out in the 16th century, as it's said. But my opinion is that we have a century gap, and the New Testament, whose Erasmus of Rotterdam is not out in 1516 but 1616. The Old Testament, the first Old Testament, would be the Bible of Alcala in Spain. It's written in many different languages.
So you're putting Alcala after Erasmus? Is that what you're saying?
There, yeah.
I'll wait to ask why.
The Babylonian Talmud, that is a command of the Pope Leo X. It was said by David Ewing in a very recent presentation he did. And there is the Confession of Faith of the Anabaptists of Germany, which come in 1625. It's said in the book it's 1525, but I think it is not. It's 1 century later. They're Anabaptists because they baptized when they're adult, and they are totally submerged by the water. It's the way John the Baptist baptized his fellow cultists. But in my opinion, this is the Roman faith of the time. Could have said they are Protestants, but I think they are not. I think they're Roman.
Right.
The
Pauline
first
Romans, yeah.
It's a bit complicated by now, but we will come to it later. And in 380, is published the Roman Canon by a guy of the Eastern Empire. Maybe he's from Alexandria. They all from Alexandria when they present them, but it's all fake. The real guy is Athanasius Kircher, who is a Jesuit and who came with a Roman canon in 1680, something like that.
Yeah.
What are the Celtic calendars? What are the lunisolar calendars, which are the first to come about? There is a normal year of 354, 355 days. These are 12 months of 29 or 30 days, which are synodic months, a moon at the time, because the moon goes from one new moon to another new moon in something like 29.5 days. And there are leap years that are 1 month longer, which makes a leap year of 384 days. And we try to reach an average year around 365.25 days, which is the tropical year, the sun year. To reach this desirable year, they set a leap year by looking at the sky on some years, but not every one of them, which makes a cycle. Like in a 90-year cycle, there are 7 leap years that are longer by 1 month than the other one. Another way to do it is calculating the moon-sun cycle. So there's a little bit of difference between the two methods, because when you set a leap year by looking at the sky, you do it at the last moment. That's the way the modern Muslim calculate the months of Ramadan and the feast of their calendar. It is said the Jews and the Chaldeans started to have a calendar and determined their leap years like this. But later they calculated a moon-sun cycle, and they were able to predetermine the days of the year, the feast. So it's a calendar. They knew the calendar in advance. For the Chaldeans and Jews, as I said, they're mainly identical because they named the months by the same name. And they have the same story. They turn from an observation to add a month and choose the leap years to a 19-year cycle. It's not the whole story, but it is the story we are told about. The Greek authors tell the Chaldeans are the first astronomers. Today, we think Chaldea is in Iraq. We have the ziggurat of Ur or Uruk, but it's not true. When the Greeks speak about the Chaldeans, they mean the Celts. The Celts had many cycles that are not the 19-year cycle. So they have many bad cycles. Maybe they were not in use by the more important cult, which was the cult of Yahu, which is the main Gaulish god. In England, they call it Jove. In Latin, we call it Jovis or Jupiter. So it's Yahweh, of course. So we could say that the Chaldeans and the Jews and the Celts are the same people. And maybe these Druids of the cult of Jovis did not use any of these bad cycles. That's why we do not say the Jews had cycles of 4 years, 5 years, 8 years, like in some other countries, because it was not admitted in their cult. But it was a late cult, because we have said that the Druidic cult knew of a revival in the 18th century. And a guy that's named Jean-Étienne Montucla.
A little frozen for me too.
Yes.
Well, wait a second. I like it. It's really interesting, this idea, like the Celts, the cults of the Celts, the Chaldeans. I think that there's a lot to that. I'm doing a video at some point in the future. I think it's later tonight with Howard Crowhurst. It's like at midnight or something. And Howard Crowhurst is the one who's been doing stuff on Karnak, Egypt, the Celts, Stonehenge, the Nebra sky discs, etc. And so the sky discs connect especially to the Celts. So I find this interesting. And yeah, I mean, we're talking to Didier. It just reminds me of Asterix, right? Come
Here I
on.
am.
Hey, he's back. What's up?
Yes.
Sorry, continue from
Yes. You just
and-
mentioned another French researcher. That's exactly where it cut off.
Yeah, and this guy, like Jean-Étienne Montucla in 1798, which is the second edition of his book, History of the Mathematics, say that in the 18th century, the German Protestants, I don't know who they were, determined Easter by sky observation, like the ancient Jews. There's a difference between the Hebrew or Greek Metonic 19-year cycle. Raphael is gone.
But always with us.
Because in the Greek or Hebrew, it's the same cycle, the cycle of Meton, used by both Greek and Hebrews. The first of the months is on the new moon, which is the first quarter, and the feast, the calendar on the 15th day, which is the full moon of the month. In the old Celtic calendars, we have only one example of them that was found in Coligny, in Bourgogne, Burgundy. It's a little bit different because the first of the months is not on the first quarter, is not on a full moon either. It comes after a full moon has passed, after the 3 months of the full moon. And the feasts are on the black moon, that are the 12th to the 14th day of the month. It is 3 days long or 3 nights long because the feasts are feasted on nights. And we speak of the 3 nights of Simonios. The Celts have, of course, their Sabbath, like the Jews had their Sabbath. It is not said the Celtic Sabbaths are on Saturday, but probably they were. We're not absolutely sure that the calendar of Coligny used the cycle. Maybe it was determined by observation, the leap years. And the months are lunar, but they're spared in 2 halves. We have one guy that is called Geminius, Denis Petot, which is a Jesuit that lived in the 17th century. He said that Geminius was living in 33 before the birth of Christ. And this Geminius said that 120 years have passed since the Isis festival is set on the winter solstice. That is, for a Celt, from the 12th to the 14th of December. It is not Christmas. It is an Isis festival, which is in Gaul, the Druidic cult of Notre Dame, which came before Christianity. Then the cult of the pregnant virgin that was set in the place of Chartres, where the cathedral is built now, was the place of the Druids. It's only the Isis festival. There is no Osiris. And in my opinion, in Celtic language, it is not Isis, which is a Greek or a Latin name, but Ostara. And the feast of Ostara was then, in the time of Geminius, the black moon after the winter solstice. It is the Jewish Easter. Ostara is Easter. Possibly, the tradition from a sun eclipse in the Gospels came from this old feast that came during a black moon, because you cannot have a sun eclipse during a full moon like modern Pesach. Something that's quite strange. Every antique people like the Greeks, the Latins, the Egyptians, the Celts, the Indians used the Pleiades, the Iades, and some asterisms that are not the modern zodiac we know of, to to set the calendar, they use the heliacal rising, the heliacal settings of these constellations to speak of a time of a year. It means because it's not accurate, because there's a difference between the sidereal year and the sun year, that they did not know of the precession of the equinoxes, or maybe they knew, but they didn't dare. They didn't care. And it's related, in my opinion, to some zodiacs we can find in Europe, mainly Italy, northern Italy, where you find zodiacs that have 10 or 11 signs. In my opinion, they're later, probably the 16th century, not the 14th. And the zodiac with 12 signs is attributed to Egypt by the ancient Greeks. Maybe these zodiacs with 12 signs are from the 17th century. So I try to put together the old feast of Ostara and these old zodiacs. From the Jewish lore, it is said that looking at the sky, the last months of Adar, when we added the leap year by observation, these last months of Adar could be doubled. So there were 2 months of Adar. It could be tripled. You could have 3 months of Adar. And this is not accurate, but it is not a way to do a lunisolar calendar. You can only double at certain years, not have 3 times a month, because they would be very long, these years. I have an interpretation that is worth what it is. I think that when there were 10 signs in the zodiacs, the Virgo covered 3 of the modern signs, which are Virgo, Libra, Scorpio. And in this time, this was related to the months January, February, and March. The Virgo, the feast of Virgo is on the 15th of December, something like that, or 25th of December. So the Virgo starts with the next month, which is January, but it covered 3 months. So we have January, February, and March. And probably Macrobius, the Latin author, did not understand it either, because he said that the first Roman calendar by the founder of Rome, who's called Romulus, had 10 months, no January or February, and it was 295 days long, which is absurd and certainly false. And I think he misunderstood the story of the 10 signs of the zodiac, because a sign was 3 months long. And then the zodiacal wheel turns a little bit, maybe a quarter, not a whole quarter, I think. Yes, a quarter. It's 3 months, 3 months difference. Virgo is now 1 month long, corresponds to the month of May, and Scorpio is 2 months long. It corresponds to the months of March and April. Then we had the 12 signs zodiacs. Libra is taken from the closer Scorpio. Libra is a sign of the equinox of March. Libra is equinox of September now. And Scorpio is now April. The first of the months corresponds to the constellation where the full moon is. And it's a current zodiacal sign. That's why Libra is the equinox of March. So the constellation are seen at night. It's totally logical. There's no logic to link the sun with the constellation, because the constellations are never seen with the sun. And the zodiac is completely reversed.
I have to make a quick comment I think is interesting to me about that, which is here in California, if when it's near graduation time, because graduation time for UCSC and a lot of these California schools is May.
Yeah.
They refer to the graduation as Beltane. It's like one in the same. It's like, oh, Beltane is coming, because when Beltane comes, then you graduate and you have a summer break. So summer break is often for some people like 3 months. It depends on how long you want it to be, but it can be like this. That idea of a summer break connected to Beltane, or even the Mayan calendar having, months out of time in order to fill, the missing time, or days out of time. I find that to be that it does exist.
And I come now to my datation, because I think that after Geminius, or maybe Geminius was speaking of it, he said that it was 120 years. The Isis festival was set on the winter solstice. He would have spoken of it when a new calendar came about, and maybe it was the calendar of Julius Caesar in 47 before Christ, which, in my opinion, came around the year 1570. There's a reason for it. We'll see it soon. It applied in Gaul. It applied everywhere in the empire, I think. Very universal. And the council in the town of Basel in Switzerland, which is supposed to have happened in 1435, but I think it's 1635, so 2 centuries later. It is said by the participants that Julius Caesar created a 19 years cycle. So it is not the Julian calendar we are told about. It's totally another thing, and another calendar. Is it the Greek Metonic cycle? In my opinion, it is not, because there are many possible 18-year cycle. You can dispatch the 7 years many ways. And in my opinion, the main difference is because the first of the months is not on the first quarter. That's the Jewish calendar or the Chaldean calendar. It is set on the black moon, which is the French new moon. Yes, our new moon is a black moon in French language. It's a difference because the Meton cycle has the first day of the month on the first quarter, as I said. And for the Greeks, the first quarter is called the new moon.
That's really interesting, because black moons, if you switch to the Vedic calendar, they have Vedic black sun discs and moon discs as well. That's interesting.
In this time, Ostara was displaced, and now it happened the 15th of March, not anymore the 15th of December, or the 12th to the 14th of December. It is now the full moon after the spring equinox. It is still the Jewish Easter. And now the Feast of the Pregnant Virgin has a feast that is called the Annunciation. Announce the baby for 9 months later, which will be in December. And that's why probably the points on the maps have changed names, because in Old Latin, Auster, like in Austria, probably, which is the Southern Empire, is in the south on the zodiacal wheel, and it's the southern hemisphere with Australia. And later, Auster means the east. That's why many think that Easter designates the east. But it was for a while, because later it was displaced a second time when we came to a sun zodiac, I think. And the beginning of spring, that corresponds to the feast of Ostara, or to the modern Easter, is now and on the left on the zodiacal wheel that corresponds to the west on the maps. So 2 changes for a small time. Why did I say 1570 for the creation of the calendar of Caesar? because in 1572 there's a new star in the constellation Cassiopeia, very brilliant, very shiny. Some said it was like the planet Venus, but it's only shown for 2 years, and after that it is said it disappeared. Or maybe it did not disappear. Maybe if it looked like Venus, it's because it was Venus. Many authors, astronomers of the time, like Tycho Brahe, was not the only guy. There were many of them that wrote about this strange star. It could have been something like a supernova, but in this time they didn't know that supernovas existed. It is related, in my opinion, to the death of Julius Caesar on the year 1572. Caesar was dead, and he turned into two different messiah. It is said that in Rome, and in my opinion, it's Eastern Rome. It is not the Italian Rome. He became the god Divus Julius. It is a cult that is found in Asia Minor, not really in Italy. It's found in the same cities where Paul visits the Christian communities in his epistles. He was a Jew that came to visit the Greeks, so maybe it's the Greek cult. And the first book of the Chronicles, King David reformed the temple with two lineages of the priest, Esamer, which is a Mitra, the cult of the legions, and now Eliezer, which in which we recognize Julius Caesar, which is, of course, the Osiris of the Greeks and the Egyptians. In my opinion, it's the same person and the same god as Divus Julius. It is said in the book of Numbers that Itamar and Eleazar are two priests, and they're the sons of Aaron. It's a tale. It's false. And in the Hebrew Talmud, it is said that Ithamar is the warrior messiah of Joseph, maybe Flavius Joseph. Because Ithamar is Mitra, it's the cult of the legion, it's the ancient cult of the temple. And now the temple had another messiah, which was Eliezer, the priestly messiah of David. David is probably the Egyptian god Thoth, and it's said in a book by Isaac Newton in the 18th century that Thoth was the minister of Osiris. In my opinion, there was no Horus, the baby Horus, yet. There was a couple made of Isis and Osiris. And Isis, which was the goddess alone, and probably the moon then, became the planet Venus, and is a lover, because she's the lover of Osiris, and she's the sister of Osiris too. It is said that under the Ptolemies king in Egypt, 5 days were added to the 360 days of the Egyptian year. Claudius Ptolemy says that. In my opinion, it's a little bit later, 1572, of course. I suggest 1595, maybe a little bit before, maybe a little bit later. He says, Ptolemy, that 5 Venusian years are equal to 8 years of 365 days, and make together, of course, an 8 years cycle between Venus and the Sun. Herodotus says the Egyptian use 360 plus 5 days each year. He could not have known of the Ptolemaic kings because he is supposed to have lived before. Maybe he knew them under Persian names. There's a guy who's probably the real Plato, who's called Gemistor Plato, a Platonician of the 15th century. In my opinion, he lived 2 centuries later, in 1630, something like that. And he complained that the Greeks had now to use the wrong Egyptian year instead of the good 19-year cycle they used before. There's another Messiah. He came from Western Europe, and it's Jesus. There's a guy who's called Francisco Carota, who wrote a book in German that's translated in English. Quite complicated to read it in English, I think. We read the German through the English language, I think. Maybe you're going to read it in German. It's a better solution. And he called his book Jesus Was Caesar. And he brought compelling evidence, far and large, in hundreds of pages. It's a total proof. No way could be wrong, except that he thinks that people have badly translated the Latin authors to come to the writings of the Gospels. That's the totally stupid theory. It's basically puns that are made with the Gospels.
Right. It seems like a big moment of apotheosis, right? Like trying to yeah. Sorry, continue.
But he did it with the Gospels, and before the Gospels, we had another book that was called the Revelation of John. In my opinion, it was written by Giovanni Pico della Mirandola. He's supposed to have lived in the second part of the 15th century, but I think he lived 1 century later, for reasons that are now evident. Revelation says that Jesus will return at the end of times, which is not the story that the Gospels told. There's an Antichrist. There's the whore of Babylon, and there is Babylon. In the maps at the end of the 16th century, the city of Cairo is called Babylon. The whore of Babylon is Isis, and the Antichrist, which is the false Christ, because there are 2 of them, is of course Osiris. The constellation Cassiopeia is now Isis, the Queen of Heaven, because Cassiopeia is sat on the throne. But in the Revelation of John, the throne becomes the throne of Jesus. A guy that was from this cult of Apocalypse was Giordano Bruno, who was burnt at the stake in 1600s by the Pope Clement VIII. Is a copy of the Antique Irenaeus of Lyon, which was an apocalyptic Christian and only had interest in the Revelation. He refuted the Gospels. The late Bruno founded the Society of the Giovannis, which suggests that John was a Giovanni, an Italian guy, like Giovanni Pico della Mirandola. And Bruno, towards the end of his life, spoke against the follies of the Egyptians, the antique Egyptians. In my opinions, the guys who followed the Revelation of John hold the Temple of Jerusalem at this time. For the Freemasons, they do not make the difference between the Temple of Jerusalem and the Knights Templar 1 millennium later. In the Epistle to the Galatians, Paul said that the Church of Jerusalem preaches another gospel, the gospel of the Revelation. There are 3.
Oh, I think he's frozen again. Well, we can take a minute here and think about some of this. I like the idea of looking at the John connection because so much of this was about a John Baptist cult, or group of people that were into forgiveness through baptism, and then Jesus gets into this as well. But also the idea of Yeshua becoming associated with the apotheosis of this Jesus character that we
Back.
see. Are you back? Great.
Didn't hear your last sentences.
Oh, I think you were at
Told about John, some John.
yeah, we're talking just about John, but you were a little past that, but you can continue from there. Yeah.
So in the
And
Church
maybe
of Jerusalem.
just before you continue, just so we don't
Mhm.
overextend, because we're at slide 16. I'm sure everything is amazing to go through. Just that you consider maybe if we have a halfway break-off point or something, just to Andreas, and maybe we can also ask some questions and maybe continue the presentation next time if there is a good point
Yeah.
to do that. Just because I think many people need lots of context,
Yeah.
wrap
So
their hands around. Thank
Israel would be the cult of Osiris. This is when I showed you the maps in the beginning. It was the countries of Germany, Russia, something like this. The prophets of Judah said the priests of Israel followed Baal, not Yahweh, and this Baal is Osiris. The Hasidim of Germany have been founded by a man called Israel ben Eliezer, who is called the Baal Shem Tov. It means Israel, son of Eliezer, son of Osiris. And Judah corresponds to Christianity. It's the same conclusion David came about. In my opinion, Judah is southern and western Europe. This Jerusalem is Rome in Italy because the description of Flavius Josephus correspond to the Italian Rome. There are tunnels between the fortress and the temple of Jerusalem. It's the Bessetti between Castle Sant'Angelo and the St. Pierre Basilica. There are wars in Italy that are led by the French kings, French or Germans, for the Duchy of Milan, the Kingdom of Naples, and the Kingdom of Jerusalem. It is never said a word about Rome. We got Jewish sects. The Pharisans are the Persians. It is said by Origen and Porphyry that the Persians followed the cult of Mitra. Flavius Josephus is an avowed Pharisee, so he followed the cult of Mitra. He was an ally to the Romans. In the second book of Kings, there's a guy called Josias who speaks of a book. The exegetes say they found the book of Deuteronomy written centuries before by the prophet Moses. This guy, Josias, puts an end to the sacrifice of children. And another guy, Joshua, that came.
A little bit of froze again. Well, this is also interesting, just the idea of the end of sacrifice and the beginning of Noahide law, right? Like this is all very synchronized at the time. All of a sudden you have groups saying we're going to stop these things, and they seem to show up, like especially sacrifice, because as soon as sacrifice ends, then people are asked to go to the temple to make payments for atonement.
And the Gospel of John said the sacrifice of Jesus ends the sacrifices in the temple. So
sorry,
in my
opinion, you
were
frozen for a bit. You want to go back to maybe
Caesar
Joshua?
Sacrifices to Jupiter. Zoroaster
even further. Start at Joshua. The Joshua.
Yeah, it displays his new law in the town of Shechem. The Gospel of John says the sacrifice of Jesus ends the sacrifices in the temple. So the Torah is not the book of Moses. It would be the book
I think
of Jesus.
the part that got skipped that's really useful. Caesar forbids the sacrifice to Jupiter and the Druids, and the Zoroaster forbids sacrifices to Mithra. So when that happens, it seems very interesting, right? Because all of a sudden it's tied in to the fire rituals and to atonement.
So it's the book of Exodus transformed the old sacrificial lunar god Moses to a simple man that said, "Thou shalt not kill." There's a notebook of Byzantium. Some say Etruscan, not the same country, not the same times, but there's a confusion about it. It was called the Suda, who was like an old Genesis. And there are.
That's an interesting combination. The idea of thou shalt not kill and thou shalt not sacrifice, right? Because I think they're very different, but we do associate them with the fact that energy is taken when someone's murdered. You're cutting off a timeline. It's a magical thing. I mean, to end a life is to end the potential for billions of lives that could happen
I mean, a
after.
sacrifice is a killing too. So
Yeah. So maybe it's a good way to look at it, is that to kill is to sacrifice. I like that idea of looking at things not like thou shalt not, Abrahamic law, but like dharmic consequentials of, hey, you're back. Go
there are
back to
tons
the
of things, there are
start
tons
right
of things to say.
start at the top with the zealots, I think.
Yeah. He made Flavius Josephus a distinction between the zealots and the Essenes. I think it's easier than we think to distinguish between the two. So the zealots are those who do not pay tribute to Rome. These are the Assyrian, and later the Muslims are Germany and Central Europe. The Essenes are the Christian monks, because they're peaceful. It's said they're peaceful and faithful to Rome. It is said in second books of Kings that Josias, the king Josias of Judah, died in the battle of Megiddo, which is Macedonia, against Necho, the king of Egypt, which is a Khan. The Apocalypse says Jesus returned at the end of times in the battle of Armageddon to fight against the Antichrist, and now he's the winner. So now the Western Christians had the Torah, which is accepted by the Pharisees, but the Essenes have made of this Jesus a Messiah. And now we have another text that's the Apocalypse of John, Revelation of John. Remember, there's another battle of Megiddo in the old times, 14th century before Christ. There was once won by the pharaoh Tutmosis III versus a king of Assyria who's called Esarhaddon. And when you reverse the name, is Balthazar, and Balthazar is Baal Caesar. The epistles of Paul say the Church of Jerusalem respects the Jewish law, and the Church of Jerusalem is identical to the Essenes. At the beginning, Paul is on the scene like the other ones. A little bit later, he gives up the Jewish law, but he keeps circumcision because it's the law of Abraham and not the law of Moses. And at the end, he totally gives up circumcision also, and he becomes a Roman Christian. Roman Christian with an emperor that's called Constantine is not said in the epistles, but it's the time of one guy that's called Constantine of Kiev. Fomenko came with a Bible that he called the Ostrog Bible that was published in 1581. It is dedicated to one Constantine of Ostrog and Kiev, and he was written against the wrong face of Arius, and I think that Arius is Osiris, brought by Mark Antony. If Constantine is Augustus, it is said by Fomenko also that Constantine and Augustus are the same guy. And in the Bible, maybe Constantine is the King Saul of Israel. And the book of Maccabees is Antiochus the Great, Seleucid Greek. Constantine and Arius are the guys in the context of the Council of Nicaea that came in 325. We do not have the right datation. In my opinion, it's about the same time, but not totally. I think Nicaea is a little bit later than Constantine, because the written texts of the Council of Nicaea do not mention neither Constantine or Arius, and the antique authors either.
when is the slap though? Right, Arius is slapped by Nicholas in like is it 325 or is it later?
Let's say it would be 1595, 1600, something like
Yeah,
this.
325. So the famous slap is in 325, where Saint Nicholas slaps Saint Arius, and everyone's upset. I call him saint, but he is a saint, just not to the Catholics. But the Catholics have a dog that's a saint, and Christopher, who's not a real person, Saint Ursula. Never mind, doesn't matter. Point is that like Saint Arius he's a saint canonized by the Ethiopian Church and the Coptic Church, and he's still followed by lots of people, right? So it's interesting that Arius is coming up here, especially if Arius is canonized in parts of, like
Yeah.
Coptic. It's part
Some
of
of the
Egypt.
stories that were invented later.
Yeah,
Would be interesting to speak of every one of them.
yeah.
Would
Sorry,
be
continue.
a long conversation, I think. It is said that Constantine, the old Emperor Constantine, was a follower of Mitra, but he later converted to Roman Christianity. Would be at the end of his reign, 1600, 1605. Sometimes it's said that he was on his deathbed. And it is said that Saul spared the life of Agag, which is the king of the Amalekites. I think it's the story of the Roman Church who wants to convert the Native Americans, though they've been largely eliminated. Much more in Northern America than in Central and Southern America, because the Spanish were a little bit smoother.
I'd argue that. I would actually say like there's more Native American culture in the United States and Mexico than there is in the rest of the Western Hemisphere combined. The Western, like South America, has become so European through Bolivarian socialism.
You would notice that Halloween is somewhat known in countries, in places where there were Roman Catholics.
Mm-hmm.
The Irish, of course, it is very well known in Louisiana, in Haiti, which are places where French were, and is well known in Mexico.
Mm-hmm. True.
So, in my opinion, Halloween is not at all a pagan feast. It's the Roman feast at the beginning of it.
Absolutely. The All Saints Day. I think it's like the most important one. That's why they try to make it seem so ghoulish, right?
There, and David Ewing is totally right. The Philistines or us uncircumcised are the Roman Catholics. There's an opponent to Saul or Constantine, which is Theodosius or King David, known as Tot or Tutmosis for the Egyptians. I'm of the opinion that he is Judah Maccabee of the Book of Maccabees, and it could be the Prophet Muhammad. I'm not totally sure of it, but there's a Muhammad III, which is a sultan in this time. In the first book of Chronicles, King David has a reformation of the temple. He brought together the lineages of Itamar and Eliezer. This is a heresy of Arius, the Egyptian cult. Those are the Gypsies. In Central Europe and Germany, they're the Bohemians and the Hasidim of Judah Maccabee. The Zealots that Flavius Josephus spoke about, which are founded by Judah the Galilean. Maybe it's the same as Judah Maccabee, as the Galilean is a German. And he's with the guy that's Zadok the Pharisee. In the first book of Kings, King David has his priest. The first one is called Abiathar, and the second one is Zadok. And the Quran in Latin is published not in 1536, but in 1636 by a French guy who's a Jesuit named Guillaume Postel. And the Quran says he brings the perfect religion, which is a mix of the cult of Asar of the Jews. And the Quran is the green man. Osiris is always depicted with a green face. And he's the Eliezer of the Temple of David. And maybe Isa of the Nazarenes was identified with Mitra or Itamar. There are many points of recoverment. They really are like Mitra and Jesus, like two identical men, two identical messiahs. For the Western events, in this time, there's a guy called Alessandro Farnese. David Ewing spoke of it too. Is supposed to have been the Pope Paul III, who lived in the middle of the 16th century. In my opinion, there's a guy who was called by the same name a little bit later, who was governor of the Low Countries for Spain. And we discovered that the Low Countries that are vassal of Spain are in fact the vassal of Russia, and the Low Countries, that's like all the north of Europe, from Lithuania to the Low Countries, actually. And this Alessandro Farnese would have been the viceroy for Northern Europe. Maybe this guy is the Apostle Paul. And with Constantine starts the War of 80 Years for the independence of the Low Countries from Spain. A little bit later, there's a War of 30 Years that is kind of a part of the War of 80 Years against the German Protestant princes, led by Charles V. Not Charles V in this in the actual history, but really it's the time of Charles V, and he fought supposedly against Protestant princes, but in my opinion, that was a war between Muslim and Roman Catholics, Roman Christians. In a certain way, it's the first crusade. The first crusade had been led by one pope that was maybe Urban III. I think it was Urban.
Oh, he's frozen. Well, okay. Someone asked earlier the Quran, and I just wanted to point out he did say the first Latin version of the Quran, which was different. It's a subtle difference. And also the idea that this is a new chronology perspective. So we are looking at the records of when things are from and saying, okay, often people are saying things are older
Back
to justify themselves. Hey, what's up? Go back.
Where was I?
I think you were at 1568.
30 years war, the war against Roman Catholics.
Which is a part of the War
German
of 80
Protestants.
Years.
Right.
It is not led by the Roman Catholics against the German Protestant princes, but somewhat against the Muslims of Germany. After Paul, there's a second pope, which is Clement I of Rome, which identity is Pope Clement VIII, just after Alessandro Farnese. And the same time, we have Henry IV of France that converted to Roman Christianity. It is well known in 1593. And in my opinion, is the guy whose name is Herod Agrippa in the Tales of Flavius Josephus, who is the assassin of James the Just in the Book of Acts. It is said that in 1597, Pope Clement expelled the Jews from Avignon. In my opinion, it was not Avignon, but Italian Rome, as I said. It is said that the other James, that's the Templar Jacques de Molay, last high priest of the Templars, died in 1314, but in my opinion, it was 1597, the time they expelled the Jews, and the time the Templars were expelled from Europe. And Giordano Bruno died just after, at the stake in 1600s. And we came back to the calendars. Macrobius, Saturn of Rubish things. 10 months is 10 zodiacal signs. Romulus plus a year of 355 days with no leap year. Numa Pompilius, still no leap year. But Titus Livius says a totally different thing than Macrobius. He said that Numa invented a cycle of 19 years. Then the calendar of the Republic, cycle of 4 years, but it's totally unsound because added months of 22 or 23 days do not make a moon. It's not accurate. It's not a good calendar. And Montucla, the French guy who wrote in 1791, said that the cycle of 4 years was the calendar of Numa. So it's the third version for the calendar of Numa. And it means that our Macrobius, the Macrobius we currently read, was edited later than the 18th century. There are way better calendars than this, and I can't understand why they would have kept a cycle of 4 years or 24 years like Macrobius suggests. And he finished with a calendar of Julius Caesar, which is the Julian calendar we know of. And we know that it was wrong because Julius Caesar created a cycle of 19 years. There were many cycles in ancient Greece in the East, but in the West, there were many calendars between the 13th and the 16th centuries. In my opinion, it's probably the 16th to the 17th centuries and the times of these calendars. Probably the cycle of 4 years in Rome and Greece are the same because the Etruscans, the ancestors of the Romans, are identical to the Greeks of Titus Livy. There is an 8-year cycle in Greece with 3 leap years, different from the 8-year cycle of Egypt because it's not sun and moon, but sun and Venus. The Egyptian calendars had a strong influence on Europe in the 17th century. Giordano Bruno spoke of the follies of the Egyptians. Montucla spoke of the Egyptian system with Venus and Mercury that turned around the sun as other planets turned around the Earth. It is totally identical to the system of Tycho Brahe and the end of the 16th century. It is said that the Egyptians created the 24 hours, the 70 and the 7 days. Today, it is said that it's the Babylonians. Maybe the Babylonians and the Egyptians are the same people. And their first day is a Saturday. Does it mean that the Friday, the holiday, like in Islam? And we know that Plato in the 17th century said that the Egyptian calendar is currently applying to Greece. What does mean Egypt in this time? Maybe it was Egypt with the Nile, the modern Egypt. Maybe it's Germany, maybe it's Tartarian Russia. But we have a second Egypt in the south, in Africa. The first drawing of the Great Pyramid is made by John Grieve in 1640. And a guy named Paul Lucas says the pyramid was covered with white limestone and written in Arabic. Towards the end of the 17th century, beginning of the 18th century. And Montucla in 1798 said the Great Pyramid lost his limestone, but the other pyramid still have there. Montucla speaks of the Egyptian zodiac. He's certain that their 180 degrees inversion means that there was a precession and high antiquity, which means the signs have turned, but we know that a total inversion means that the calendar are lunar at the beginning. Montucla displays 3 kinds of zodiac. In my opinion, the first one, the 2 bears, Draco at the center, 3 bands of constellation. That is supposed to have been the calendar of the Gnostics in the 4th century, is displayed on maps by Hondius in 1640. He speaks of the calendar by the Copt, which is a Coptic calendar with 3 signs of our zodiac. But the Copt follow the Gospel of Mark, and Mark is published in 1616 by Erasmus in Europe. And Athanasius' culture displays 12 sign zodiac, quite similar to our And Kircher lived around 1650. And we already have the garbage. The garbage story, in my opinion, has been set into place by a guy that's named Denis Petot in 1627 that creates the character of Censorinus, the Latin author. And another guy is guilty, is Jean-Sylvain Bailly, close to Montucla, 1780, is the forger of the Age of Aquarius, the Age of Taurus, the Age of Aries, and likes. So it is said by the archaeologists that the Egyptians first used the Sirius heliacal rising for the first of the year, then had a year of 360 days, and had a year of 365 days. And they knew of a great year known as a Sotic period. Sotis is supposed to have been the star Sirius, which is a period of 1461 years, according to Censorinus. And they think that this Sotic period corresponds to our precession of the equinoxes. Precession of the equinoxes is not 1471 years, but 26,000 years, something like this. You know it. And 1461 years are the combination of 2 years of 365, 365.25. After this time of 14,000 years, stars are found at the same place on the same day. And these years are not the years that are in the game, in the precession of the equinoxes, which are the tropical year and the sidereal year, which are very close, something like 365.24, 365.25. We are really not as accurate as this, so it means they didn't know of precession, and if they knew of, they didn't care. The use of the heliacal risings of stars mean that they did not know of the precession, they did not care either. And more even, the Egyptian archaeology did not find any trace of the use of the ages of the zodiacs, not even the use of a great year. Why would it be serious? Because any star would fit. Moreover, when you look at the Canopus Stela in the delta of the Nile, it is said that the Ptolemaic kings introduced a period of Isis, not Sotis, in relation to the 365 days year. And Pliny says that the heliacal rising of Isis is the heliacal rising of Venus. And we come back to Claudius Ptolemy, who said that the Egyptians use a cycle of 8 years of 365 days in relation to the cycle of Venus that appeared after the appearance of Venus in 1572. So Censorinus is totally wrong, and it's a fake. In the West, we are told of an old guy who's said to have lived in the East, which was a bishop of Laodicea in Greece, who's called Anatolius, who created a 19-year cycle in 280, who created the Diocletian era in the time of the Emperor Diocletian. Montucla says it is not the Metonic cycle, but a little less accurate, and it was applied to the Julian year with 2 bisextile days instead of 4 during the 19-year cycle. Why did they change a good Metonic calendar to a worse one? And a 19-year cycle is related to a cycle of 2 luminaries. For the 19, it's the moon and the sun. It does not fit the Julian calendar at all. There are many ways to add 7 months and choose months of 29 or 30 days. So maybe it's the reason why this cycle of 19 years is different from the Metonic cycle. But we are told that there's a guy called Aloysius Lilius in 1576 that created a new calendar and created the era of Diocletian and a 19-year cycle. Anatolius is a full creation. It never existed. In my opinion, Diocletian means Deus Christian, or Christian God. And it is not the cycle of 19 years of Caesar, but a little bit different. It comes 6 years later. It is said
I
that
want to say really
Lilius
quickly because
changed
we
the
got
golden number for the Epacta.
Let me just say really quickly because I saw some comments and some people were like kind of confused about like what is the thing that's going on. I just want to say we have all of these different people and every different group of people's using a different calendar. And so our job is then to use these calendars to figure out what one universal calendar would say is going on. But that's very difficult because all of those calendars are different and they're using different things to measure. So if we go to those things and try to measure them, we find that they're happening at different times. Like if they're using the moon at this moment to say this is when their calendar is going, or if they're using Venus, right? And we know because of the Catholics going to China when Venus was sighted, then it changes. Like then it says, okay, well then their calendar cannot be at the time when we're saying it was, and it has to be shifted to another time. And so this is just the most logical time based on actual observations of the sky and also what's going on in the world. But yeah, I enjoy your presentation. Didn't want to interrupt, but yeah, continuons s'il vous plaît.
In my opinion, it's a question of power. Because if you can have your calendar that follows, then it means you lead the game.
Right.
And it's, in my opinion, the calendars are not well treated by different houses. Montucla did not understand anything of the calendars. He said rubbish thing, and even Fomenko did not understand he says tons of things that are nonsense. It's the worst part of his work, I think. It's in the 6th or 7th book in English. It's really the chapter on calendars is totally inaccurate.
It's really interesting, especially because now we're getting to particularly things that we can talk about that are relevant to me, like for like Diocletian's calendar. You're looking at Croatia and Yugoslavia today; they still are living in this kind of paradigm of Diocletian. It's still there, right? All the temple and everything else. And so, yeah, you go collect the stories, and the stories are all around a time. It's a time. They've got moments in that time. They've got holidays. There's things happening. We have a lot of information about that. When that time is exactly becomes a lot more confusing when you try to match it up against another group's time. You're like, oh, what was going on in Turkey? What was going on in Spain at that exact same time? That gets to be really weird because there's a lot of things that are going on that don't really add up to what we're but it has to, right? It has to be this way. You know, that's kind of the way we've treated it.
Well, he brought the Epacta. And what's the Epacta? It's the day in the cycle of the moon when the year or the months start. So it means the month does not start with a new moon. And Montucla even said that the year starts at the moon 12. So there's a 10 days gap or 11 days gap between the Metonic cycle and the calendar of Lilius. And this 10 days gap corresponds to Gregorian Reformation of the calendar in 1582, which is very well known in France and Italy. Don't know for Italy, but France is very, very well known.
Croatians love it too.
There were books that were published in France and Italy in these times, and they're very interesting. I didn't treat them myself, but I wrote a book about it and works of next to be doctors that did not understand what they read.
I need to go research it more, but I remember, I mean, Croatians love to claim things, right? Like we had Christopher Columbus or Marco Polo or whatever. Like, he was really from our island or whatever the kind of thing is. But one of the things we love to claim is like
the Irish and the Welsh like to say everything comes from their country.
well,
there are things like this in Turkey, Russia, and maybe France.
I think the Irish did end up porting a bunch of people's stuff right after like some plagues. They ended up buying like, what are those books? Give me those books. That's probably what happened. But with the Croatians, they like to say that the Gregorian reform really started in the Croatian monasteries. So I don't know. I'd like to look into that more, but that would be interesting because then it says it spreads out of the Roman Empire out of Dalmatia and Italy and on Roman Dalmatia.
So there's a guy in the 5th or 6th century that was called Isidore of Sevilla, who said that the first Christian had their feast the day of the Jewish feast. He said that the apostles, the ones that lived with Jesus, were quartodecimans Christian, which means they had their Easter on the 14th day of the moon, which is in the West the 15th of March, which is the day of the feast of Ostara, which in my opinion is the Jewish Easter. So the books say that the spring equinox in these times was the 11th of March and Christmas was the 15th of December. So what does it mean? It means that the French in 1580 are still following the Jewish feast and the Jewish calendar. They're still quartodeciman Christians. And this guy, Irenaeus of Lyon, which is a town, quite big town in France, who is said to be the leader of the quartodecimans, was archbishop. Giordano Bruno, who is a parallel character in the end of the 16th century, was priest in Lyon too. Two other authors in the 8th and Augustine is maybe the 6th century. They say that the 21st of March was the spring equinox. According to the Bible, it's not the day of the equinox in the time of the Council of Nicaea. It's a datation prescribed by the Bible. So if the spring equinox was on the 11th of March, we had a severe 10 days, and it was what happened on the 1582 when we shifted from the 4th to the 15th of October. And now the feasts were on the 25th of the month and not the 15th of the month. So the Annunciation was now the 25th of March, and the Christian Easter was the 25th of March too, and Christmas was now the 25th of December. There's another story with the Roman feast that was supposed to have turned to the 15th of the month to the 25th of the month, and they're quite identical with the Christian feast as the Roman feast of Saturnalia, which is a week before the feast of 25th of December, is identical to the Feast of Fools, which is told by Victor Hugo in his novel Notre Dame de Paris. That's supposed to have happened in the 14th century. There's the same story of a beggar that's crowned king, and at the end of the feast, he's executed or something like that. These guys, Bede and Augustine, say that the first Christians are no longer quartodecimans because they had Easter the 25th of March on the day Christ died, and not the day of the resurrection 3 days later. It means that these guys, Bede and Augustine, wrote after 1582, and maybe a little bit later even. Notice that it's still the same day as the Jewish feast, but 10 days off because they do not use the same calendar. So this guy, Clement VIII, who's the second pope, is called in his native name Ippolito. There's a cycle of Ippolito de Porto. It's said by Montucla. I didn't have known of it before. It's a cycle of 16 jollion years, about 16 years. and it was not accurate because the new moon happened three days too early, and the Jews were angry. In my opinion, it's because Hippolyte wanted to use the first quarter as the new moon and not the black moon. It's now called the tradition of Hippolyte of Rome, and not Porto. In my opinion, it's the same tradition brought by the author of a calendar that's named Christophoros Clavius, who wrote Romani Calendari 1603. And this guy, Clavius, he said that put the new moon 3 days after, and Easter will not happen before the full moon. Montucla did not understand anything. He tries to explain it with the Gregorian calendar, and it simply means that the Jews, which are the Gauls, use the black moon, and Clavius chooses the first quarter. The angry Jewish are Joseph Scaliger, because he's a supporter of the calendar of Lelius, though historians say that Scaliger was an opponent to the Gregorian Reformation. He's not an opponent of Lelius, he's an opponent to Clavius. And the mathematician François Viette, who said that Clavius' calendar is not good, my calendar is closer to the Bull of Gregory, and he suggests moons of 27, 28, 32 days. Did not have the chance to read it. Montucla, who thinks the Gregorian calendar is our Gregorian calendar, do not understand how a master of mathematics like Viette can see fictitious mistakes in Clavius. In this time, they had the Bible of Tinsdale, who's an English guy.
Can I just, because someone in the audience again was, I think, confused, so I just wanted to clarify. So you're talking about Victor Hugo, and he's writing about an event that happened accordingly in the 14th century, correct? Is that what you're saying? Or are you saying that Victor Hugo is writing like?
No. The time of the novel is supposed to have been the 14th century.
Correct. Okay.
But
Sorry.
in my opinion,
not Victor Hugo is
2 or 3 centuries later.
Yeah. Okay. Just making sure you understand. Some people wouldn't get that. All right. Thank you.
In Gaul and England, we still have the guys that follow the Torah of Jesus and the Book of Revelation. It states that Tinsdale in England published a Bible with only the Torah and one book that's supposed to have been the Book of Jonas. It's not the Book of Jonas, it's the Revelation of John. Same thing in Egypt with the Dead Sea Scrolls. You have the Torah and then you have the Book of Revelation. It's somewhat like a Western Christianity. Even in Egypt, don't know how they came this east. And they support a guy that's named Zadok, their priest. Maybe Zadok means it's James the Just. Maybe another Zadok, the Zadok of David. I don't think so. I think it's James the Just. Don't know how he could be.
It's a good example because Zadok means righteousness, right? So it's like piety, righteousness, justice. You know, it's kind of a similar concept.
I adopted Zadok of David, maybe the former Zadok, James the Just. They're at war with the Kittim. It has been said that the Greeks, it is said that the Romans. In my opinion, the Kittim means that the Goths, the Copts, or the Egyptians. Nicaea.
Okay, this is what people have been waiting for. I just wanted to also say thank you for thank you guys for hanging on, because I know this is a lot. This is a lot of data, but it's amazing because again, we're doing here. You know, Didier is taking all of these different stories of history, and it's like, okay, well, these are the stories that are supposed to happen. This is what they believed is going on, either at the time, right? Because you've got actually like records during Diocletian period, records during the Arius period, and we're supposed to believe these are happening, and this is supposed to be a thing. Or 19th century, they're like, oh, in the 19th century, we have this is the history that they're teaching kids in school, what happened at this time. If you don't try to compare them in some crazy with like red strings, you know, you won't have nearly as much fun. So, sorry, continue it. Stevie.
We have found the sources for the Council of Nicaea. It is said that the decree or false decretals published by Isidore of Sevilla. They say it's a pseudo Isidore, and false decretals. I think they're totally genuine because they wrote the same story as every ancient author wrote. All these sources, Bede, Augustine, the false decretals, have been studied at the Council of Basel. In my opinion, who started in 1631, and they start to study the calendar in 1635. The guy that's called Eusebius, supposed to be the author of the history of the church, Eusebius of Caesarea, wrote a table of new moons according to a 19-year cycle. In my opinion, the new moons of Eusebius are the Metonic cycle. Maybe Meton is somewhat of a cover character for Eusebius. These calendar have been adopted by the Jews, not the former calendars. They've been erased by the history. The false decretals, which is a true decree, say the Christian Easter will not anymore be the full moon after the equinox, but the next Sunday. It will not be the death of Jesus, but now it will be the resurrection of Jesus 3 days later. Probably at these times, they wrote new ends to the Greek Gospels. There are versions of the Gospels without determinations with the resurrection and the later events. And they've been brought together to publish the New Testament in Latin by Erasmus of Roterodamus in 1616. There are long periods of the Metonic calendar. I'm interested by it, but it's somewhat not important. It is said that the first Masonic Lodge was founded in Rosslyn in Scotland in 1591. Many datations have been proposed, but the accurate one in 1591, just 1 year after the Jews were expelled from Avignon, which is Rome. I think the place is wrong too, because it was not Rosslyn in Scotland, but Russian land or Scythian land, which is Babylon. Babylon is basically Moscow, as Fomenko has brought to our attention. Second Book of Kings, 4 kings of Judah are Ammon, Josias, Joachim, and Eliakim. Ammon is Moses, the god Ammon of Egypt, horned god, like Moses is the horned god in the statuary. Josias is, of course, Jesus. Joachim is James, the just. Eliakim is Mikhail of Russia. In Book of Maccabees, it is said that Antiochus Epiphanes profanated the temple, replaced Dieu by Jupiter, and sacrificed porks in the temple. In Flavius Josephus, it is said that Antiochus replaced Yahweh by Zeus, which is the opposite of the Book of Maccabees. And in my opinion, Flavius Josephus is right, and Maccabees is a forgery. It's Jove who's the main Gaulish god, and Zeus, Dieu, God, takes the place of Jovis or Jupiter. It's well known that the Basilica of St. Peter has been made upon a Mitrea and a Church of Jupiter. It's the same thing in Paris. We have the Church of Jupiter just before the Church of Notre Dame, and the same in Chartres. We have the Church of Jupiter. Second Book of Kings, Nebuchadnezzar profanated the temple, brought the Judah, Jerusalem to Babylon with King Eliakim. The Judeo-Christians become now the Nazarenes. They're the Russians. That's the way they are called in the Quran. 1598 is the beginning of the reign of Boris Godunov, Tsar of Russia. Godunov Tsar is Nebuchadnezzar. In the Book of Maccabees, called Bacchides is governor, which means is a Caesar, not the emperor Augustus. of Jerusalem, and now Jerusalem is Moscow. Is the governor for Antiochus, who is Constantine in Kiev, while Alcim, Michael, is the high priest. Alcim is a legitimate priest, but for Judah Maccabee, he followed the Greek rites, which means is a Roman Christian, and was somewhat of a heretic. It is said that in first book of Maccabee was less distorted than the second book. That later, after Bacchidus is governor, Alcine comes back to Jerusalem and became the governor of Jerusalem. It's the reign of Mikhail of Russia, first of the Romanovs. It's not true, the Romanovs came later. I already said that. For the version of Maccabee, Judah Maccabee has taken the town, the city of Jerusalem, and rebuilt the temple in 1605, and dies the same year. In 1605, Alcim flees to Syria, which is Russia.
Just because it might have been just to refresh people, and also if anyone came late. And by the way, just because like Travis McClung, I'm really reticent to just say this guy's a pimp, right? It's such an amazing man. He comes into the classroom, he puts a $2 bill right in the pocket of the professor. He sits down, he throws a membership up so to share with the class. I mean, that's pretty much the coolest thing ever. We love you, Travis. But just because you did say it earlier, but it's important, this idea that the Latin translation of the Quran happened late. It happened probably like 1536 or maybe even 1636, according to what it looks like is possible. So this changes a lot about our perspective of the Quran, especially from a Western perspective of Islam, which is after the Spanish Inquisition. We're looking now at like a far later timeline, and it's changing our perspective also of what we're saying happened in their history. Because now we're looking at their perspective of what happened. Sorry, continue.
Parallel the conquest of Jebus by David, conquest of Kadesh by Tutmosis, which is Kadesh means somewhat the holy city. I'm a bit troubled by the name because Al-Qad could have meant the holy city, but Al-Qad is the modern Jerusalem, and I think David Ewing would not would not agree with me on that. Possibly it means Cairo. Possibly it means Moscow. I don't know. In the same time, when Bacchidus rules Jerusalem, he was just the Caesar, the governor. The king ruled in Syria, and it was Demetrius Sota after the death of Antiochus, which was Constantine. And this Demetrius, as a parallel in the Russian history, is called False Dmitry, who reigned only 1 year in 1605. In the Book of Kings, the first Book of Kings, I think Demetrius Soter was Adonias, which means someone's like Adonias is ruler, lord. Adonias is the first son of David, and he was later killed by Solomon. Don't know if it's accurate, but it's the way it is told in the Book of Kings. Michael Alcim followed the Greek rites, but was of a legitimate lineage. We have a parallel in the story told by the Samaritans, the modern Samaritans in Palestine. They say that their first priest was called Shelemiah, and he ruled from 1613 to 1624. The first year, the year of the beginning of function, is the same as Michael, but somewhat he stopped his sacerdotal functions somewhat before Michael stopped his kingship. He was of the lineage of Eliezer, But the Samaritans claim to be Greek and Israelites. They're not Jewish, means they're not Christian. They severed the Samaritan from the Jews when Eli is probably Jesus, or possibly Osiris, abandoned Gerizim, which is Jerusalem, so it was Rome, for Shiloh. Shiloh is probably Constantinople, and the Jews are from the west. And Solomon the Magnificent is supposed to have been Sultan in the 16th century, the 17th century. I saw a map with the Solomon the Magnificent in the 17th century. I lost it. If someone finds it again, I'd like to see it. But I'm certain he lived in the 17th century because I've seen the map. He's not an Ottoman, is not a Jew according to the Book of Maccabees. The Ottomans are called the Hasmoneans in the Book of Maccabees, and Josephus. Their Greek opponents are called the Seleucids. They're identical with the Turks, the Seljuk Turks, which in fact are Greeks. There are no character related to Solomon or Adonias among the Hasmoneans, whether it's in the Book of the Maccabees or Josephus. Adonias, as we said, is Demetrios Soter, and Solomon could be Alexander Ballas or Antiochus VII. Possibly there was a fusion of characters, or it was split in two characters, I don't know. Possibly Suleiman the Magnificent was Charles V, the great emperor of the West, emperor of Germany, not Spain. In 1526, this Charles V has sacked the town of Rome and profanated the Church of St. Peter. It's 1 century later, 1625. It corresponds to the fall of the Temple of Jerusalem. And in 1626, that's the year according to history, is a consecration of the new Basilica of St. Peter in Rome. Is it really a consecration of a new basilica in Rome? Possibly yes, but there was another church in Constantinople which was built in the 17th century under Solomon, and it's Hagia Sophia. It's linked to a Byzantine king whose name Justinian. Justinian has many traits of character close to Suleiman. Zadok the priest after Michael, according to the Samaritans. The guy is called Zedaka in the lineage of the Samaritans. He is high priest between 1624 and 1650. It's the same guy. For Josephus, who said the Zealots had been founded by Judah the Galilean and Zadok the Pharisee. So it's David and Zadok in the first book of Kings. But Zadok somewhat continues after the death of David because it's the priest who anoints King Solomon, like said Heindel. Nebuchadnezzar in the second book of Kings replaces Eliakim, which is Michael, by Zedekias, the king of Judah, Zedekias. Here, the character Nebuchadnezzar designs King Solomon, and not Boris Godunov, like in the beginning of the Book of Kings, which is somewhat a conflation of two different stories for the same character, Nebuchadnezzar. And at the end of the rule of Suleiman, Zadok is killed because he's treated as an enemy. And at the end of the second book of Kings, Seditius is overthrown by Nebuchadnezzar, and Seditius is the last king of Judah. High priests have been called kings in the second book of Kings. The Council of Nicaea is a Greek council. It's unknown in the West. In the West, we have many calendars that have been proposed until the year 1625, I think, something like this. And for the council in Basel that started in 1631, they have invited a Greek delegates, Greek officials, and suddenly the decree of Nicaea that was supposed to be lost for years suddenly reappears in the West. It is simple. It was brought by the Greeks. We have characters that are old characters of the 6th century that are Augustine and Denis the Small. They lived in the 16th or 17th century. It's an Italian called Agostino Chigi. It's easy to see because the funerary monument of Agostino Chigi is in the church St. Augustine of Siena. And as Fomenko has said, Denis the Small is Denis Petot, a Jesuit of the 17th century. Both said that Easter were first on the 25th of March, and then they say that Easter is on the Sunday after the full moon. So they lived in the West before and after the Council of Nicaea. Probably the datation of Demetrius Soter, the emperor in Syria, are identical to the datation of Pope Paul V in the West. It is time, the real popes in the West were probably the popes of the Western Schism that lived before the Council of Basel in the 15th century, and they were free. The famous Gregory XII is Gregory the 13th, that is supposed to have brought the Gregorian reform of the calendar. Probably is even another Gregory the 14th, Gregory the 15th. So we've got another pope in Avignon, another pope in Pisa. So in the 5th century, probably 1620, a guy named Victorin in France suggested a new 19-year cycle, which was combined to a 28-year cycle, which is a sun cycle. And the two cycles combined make a great cycle of 532 years. That's possible with this cycle to have the full moon of Easter on the same day of the month and the week, every 532 years. So it was perfected by Denis the Small, who added that the death of Christ followed the beginning of an era of 532 years, and created, by the way, the Christian era, which is called in Latin the Anno Domini. It starts the year in the 1st of April, after the death of Christ, 25th of March. It means the index of the year, which is we are in the 17th century. The year is already 16-0, like that. It did not change the index of the year, but now it has another meaning. It means that we are in 1627, and after the death of Christ. It was brought not in the 6th century but Fomenko brought to our attention that Denis the Small is Denis Petot, the Jesuit author, who is one of the main falsifiers upon chronology. It's even said very quickly in the 7th century by Bates the Venerable of England that Jesus was born 2 years earlier, so the era was wrong, the Anno Domini was wrong. But Bates the Venerable is in fact published in the 16th century, which means, in my opinion, because he spoke of Nicaea in the 17th century, and the calculation was made by Kepler in the 17th century. So it's not a disputation that could have been made before the existence of Kepler. Roger Bacon and other British authors in the 13th century that truly lived in the 17th century criticized the wrong months of Dennis. What are the wrong months? Probably there are 30 and 31 days of the Julian calendar. So Denis Pétot in 1627 brought the Julian calendar. It is said that the councils in the 17th century, yes, tied to the Inanna's descent into the underworld, yes, same character in another language. No decision was taken in Basel. No decision was taken in Ferrara and Florence. But the Jesuit missionaries in China and India, 1630 and years later, brought the calendar of Meton in the East, in China and India. In my opinion, is the Hebrew calendar more than the Greeks, because the beginning of the year corresponds to the Jews and not the Greeks. Alors, so Urban the Eighth, and not Urban the Third or Fourth, don't remember, was a crusader against the Seljuks of Suleiman or Saladin, which is a second Alexander, to the aid of Alexei Komnenos of Byzantium, which is Alexei of Russia. Probably Komnenos means Asmonean. There's no Asmonean named Alexei in the book of Maccabees or Josephus. Is called in the second book of Maccabees Seleucus, which would mean he's a Greek king. Probably there's a kind of distortion here. The only Asmonean that follows Simon Maccabee is John Hyrcanus. John Hyrcanus is Presbyter Johannes, priest John, great Christian king in the East. Is Genghis Khan, of course. In the Russian history is Ivan V, who comes just after Alexei of Russia. These are the Crusades, of course, and this is the time of the 30 Years' War in Germany too. So the Crusades happened in Europe as well. And there was another crusade, which was the Crusade of the Kaisars, which is supposed to have existed in the 13th century, with a pope that was named Innocent. It's the follower of Urban VIII. It's Urban Innocent X, who was pope between 1644 and 1655. These Kaisars, what are they? There are different theories about them. A lot of forgeries have been made. In my opinion, these Kaisars were the original apocalyptic Christian of the temple, who still lived, for some of them, in the south of France, in some places in Europe, and they were persecuted by the Roman Christians. In Russia and Greece, there was a guy called Matthew Blastaris, who's supposed to have lived in the 14th century, but in my opinion, they lived in the 17th century, because his calendar is identical to the Paschalia that Fomenko depicts in his book, and which is published in 1652. So, in my opinion, it's the time of Matthew Blastaris, and they brought the two cycles of 19 and 28 years of Dennis the Small, and the months are 30 and 31 days long. So the East, Russia, adopted the Julian calendar following Denis Pétot. It is said that the Persians adopted the Julian calendar and the lunar year of 354 days in the year fixed 30. Persians means here, in my opinion, the Russians. Council of Trent is supposed to have existed in the 16th century in 3 phases. Probably only the last phase corresponds to the true Council of Trent, and would be a century later, 1662, 1663. Possibly it was the time the Julian calendar was adopted in the West. It is said that the 1st of January was adopted in France under Charles IX in 1567. Probably Charles V of Germany in 1667. It is said that the Arabs severed from the Persian of Malik Shah in 1079. In my opinion, it's 1679 when Genghis Khan converts to Christianity. It is said in the book of Maccabees and in the book of Flavius Josephus that he became a Sadducee or Zadokite and became an enemy of the old temple of the Pharisians, which are the Persians. That's why Genghis Khan is very, very loved in France. I found a book in the 17th and 18th century where Genghis Khan is considered as a handsome man, full of virtues. The Germans were afraid of Genghis Khan, but the French loved him. It is said in the New Testament that the Zadokites are close to the temple, which means they're the Orthodox Christian. In this time, we have two late calendars. It's the Persian cycle of 33 years by Omar Khayyam, who is supposed to have lived in the 11th century. It is said that the equinox fluctuates on less than 24 hours. That is always on the same day of the year. It's quite complicated. And in the same time, we have the Gregorian calendar, and I have not the exact datation of its creation, but probably around 1700. And the equinox fluctuates between 3 days, 21, 20, and 19. It's the 21st of March, only 25% of the time. So it means that in reality, the full moon can happen before the 21st of the month of March. China, the story of China relative to the calendars and mathematics is totally invented by the Jesuits, who hold the Tribunal of Mathematics in China since the year 1630, given by the Emperor of China. They were still in place when Montucla wrote in 1798. But their order in the West was already dissolved since 1775, I think. A Jesuit called Father Charles chose the Metonic calendar for China. It means, in my opinion, the Jewish calendar. A guy named Father Gobiel, 1723, wrote the history of the Chinese astronomy. The archives are supposed to cover 3 millennium before the time of Christ. Their astronomy are very precise. They're credited for tons of inventions. While Montucla says that by the end of the 18th century, the modern Chinese are quite ignorant. Only the Jesuits seems to know something in the country. It was something like sugar to hold their position. They created the organ with different sides of pipes 2,000 years before the Greeks. They brought a system of weight and measure in the 3rd millennium before Christ, while in the 18th century it was the same in Europe. It is said that they brought the Metonic cycle in 2650 before Christ, but it was just introduced by the Jesuits in 1650. Hello, Magic Square. Yeah, it's live.
Yeah, Magic Square says, Didier, my man, bringing France on the map. Much love, France on the map. Much love from France. So Raphael and Didier. Epic. I'd
He
like to
said,
say, I should probably say really quickly, like it's amazing what you're going through because like you've covered Diocletian to the Council of Trent in a way that really pulls it together. Like the idea is that there are multiple scenarios of what's going on in Rome, what's going on in Turkey, what people are thinking is the calendar for the Byzantines is different when the Ottoman calendar changes, and that they're using a lunar calendar so that we can follow the 19-year cycle is really interesting because then we know when this is likely to happen because the Council of Trent, most people don't argue, is like 1525, 27. So it actually, this is where we start to get to a point where it's like these are things that happen generationally recently enough
it's
to
a
certain
question
families.
of 5 or 10 years. Is not
Right.
we're quite accurate with the datation, and I think it's really important because otherwise, we speak in the moving sounds.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly.
And
I have real anchors is really important. I have quite some of them. The Ostrog Bible, 1581 is one of them, for example.
and you're delivering this low-key presentation, but just to make it go back here briefly, did I understand this correctly? You're basically saying at least the whole idea of the whatever great cultural history of China and so on, this meme was planted around that time by some Jesuit
Yeah,
guys
yeah,
that
it's the
went over
same
there. Hmm.
conclusion. Fomenko came around. He's totally right, but I had other data, so I wanted to share it with you.
Yes, no, please go on. I just want to because you're just mentioning things like that, and if someone is not really attentive or doesn't exactly understand what you're saying there, these are big things. So yeah,
Yeah,
thank you for
it
pointing
would
it out.
be
Yeah.
it would be good to say maybe like Victor Hugo says this happened in 1400 or this happens because I think that's maybe the confusion is they're saying, well, wait, that's not when it happened. And we're not saying these are things happening when they're happening. We're saying this is when people are saying that this happened for them. This is their version of reality in the 15th century or the 19th century or the 20th century. We're looking at their scenarios for what they think when these things happen and just trying to put them together. And he's got a pretty decent hypothesis, I think, that even it's on par with like the Anatoly Fomenko Ewan Jr. idea. We can test it along the way, but let's hear it out.
Another time of creation of astronomy suggested by Gobiel in 1723 is the conjunction of 5 planets on the 15th degree of Aquarius, somewhat 2,400 and 500 years before Christ. And it was the time that the first of the year was determined to be the next new moon. But this conjunction was calculated by the French Jesuit Mabillon in 1680. And the new moon on the 15th of March is just a Jewish year. And Aquarius is part of the Western zodiac, of course. The creation of the sphere of stars, still very ancient, is identical to the creation of the sphere of stars by Tycho Brahe in the 16th century, end of the 16th century. The Han star charts in the 300 before Christ, 3rd century before Christ, with the orbit of the planets with the sun at the center is identical to the creation of the system Sun Central by Copernicus in 1543, in fact 1644 in my opinion. And of course, the Han dynasty is the Tartarian Khans in the 17th century. The Ming, which are a modern dynasty, beginning of the 15th century and the 14th, brought the calculation of precession of the equinoxes, 1 degree every 72 years. But 2 centuries later, it was calculated at this precision by Tycho Brahe. In India, it's somewhat the same thing. The Brahmins, at the end of the 18th century, in the book of Montucla, said that their astronomy comes from the north. His fellow French colleague, Jean-Sylvain Bailly, said that these are maybe the Tartarians, and I agree with him, but he said that the Tartarians are the Atlantis, and he suggested that they are very old. In my opinion, they're not so old because the Mughal Empire, which came from the north, started in the year 1600, something like that. Montucla, which somewhat an ancient fan of new chronology, said that there was no mention of Kali Yuga among the Indians before the 12th century. Yes, and maybe later. In my opinion, the Kali Yuga is supposed to start 3101 before Christ, is identical with the datation of the world in the tables of Alphonse of Toledo, King of Spain or King of Portugal. So many names he's known about, but it's always Alphonse, King. Is supposed to have been a king and an astronomer living in the 13th century. In my opinion, it's false. It's somewhat related to the year 1600, like the Mughal Empire. In my opinion, these tables were used by the Jesuits and brought by the Jesuits with them in India. There's a strong influence of Egypt in India, which means Egypt means the influence of Germany, because Tycho Brahe has the same system as the Egyptians. The Indians had 360 days and a bit more, it says by Montucla, like the Egyptian has this year of 360 years plus 5 epagomenal days, as they say. It's used by the Greeks in the year 1630, as say Gemistes Plateau, and the Indians still had that in 1798, as Montucla said. And the start of the year is the 1st of April on 0 degree of the sign Aries. It's the same as the Egyptian year mentioned by Claudius Ptolemy. It is said that the old method for calculating the lunar eclipses was created in Benares, but the observatory of Akbar, the Mongol emperor, was set in Benares in year 1600. Is the observatory of Akbar identical to the observatory of Tycho Brahe? Somewhat the same name. They say that the Egyptian year, sun year, and sidereal year are better than the years, solar year and sidereal year of Hipparchus, the old Hipparchus. But Hipparchus is identical to Tycho Brahe, according to Fomenko, and he's totally right. But they say too that the year is 360 days long. It's totally impossible. The year is not precise enough, and the only one had one instrument that was a solar stick. So many contradictory elements here. And the precession of the equinoxes was 24,000 years long. It's the precision attained by the Arab Albertinus in the same year 1600. This long era of the precession, 24,000 years, has been mystified in the yugas, in my opinion, and doubled, tripled to make as many yugas as you want. In Siam, which is now modern Thailand, I think, it is said that they had a cycle of 19 years better than the cycle of Meton. What is this cycle of 19 years better than the one of Meton? Montucla says it, but it did not display this precise cycle. So it's just said in the wind. And in Siam, they said that the start of the world is on the 21st of March, 6384, and which was a day for the equinox, the solar eclipse, and the new moon. which goes together, I think. But this datation was the one brought by Matthew Vlaster in the 17th century in Russia. So I think I ended my presentation. If you have questions. I don't hear you.
The mute button didn't work. I appreciate this presentation. It's pretty interesting. So let me open up like my recap and see if that like helps set up here. Let's start here. So Hasidic Judaism, one of the things that you went over is talking about the group of Hasidic Jews and that it's a modern religious movement. And we don't always think about this because we think of it as a very orthodox or conservative movement, but a lot of these conservative movements started in the 19th century, right? Or maybe into the 17th century, some of the earliest movements, but that gets into like Zabbatism, and there are obvious differences. So it's important to note that, but that the Hasidic Jewish movement started so late, and that it's using this calendar and what their history is. Like that's very interesting to get into that because of what we talked about with the idea of Akhenaten, of Moses, of Egypt, of this idea that they're leaving Egypt, Freud's idea of Osarseph, and the adaptation of the Osiris, like all these stories we've heard for years about, hey, this guy who's doing a Jubilee thing and living his life, they've burned the books about his life, and now you've got another story about another guy, which is way more similar to the one that they were doing before, right? Like they just rebrand with the thing that's contemporaneously popular, but it's the story they've been telling, it sounds like. And just that also the mysteries of Isis are secrets, that they have got the secrets of 10,000 names, and they've got the secret schools, and that they're going to have a secret knowledge that's not told to the outside world. That tracks. That makes a lot of sense. It was interesting also you brought up like the book of Revelation, because there's just so much. It's so interesting how Christians are based on post-Jesus living in thought. Like they're all about what happens after Jesus. They're all about what Paul says. They're all about the book of John, all these things. And so it's again, it's just proving the point that they're talking about a completely different character, because they even have to differentiate him to the point of he's basically Docetized and not a person. It's like a hologram that God's projecting. And because they can't even handle it. They can't even handle how it's Paris syndrome, I think is what they call it, where it's like they can't even see Paris and they're standing in it. Yeah, I forget what the thing with Nebutet and like the laments of Josiah. Okay, so bringing up like Jesuit chronology, like that's just the most obvious thing. You've got a group of Jesuits that are constantly trying to justify their power. And this is all happening right before they're about to be suppressed. This is right before the Jesuit suppression. And they're going around and they're saying, this is the history of this place. This is the history of that place. Even to the point of like 200 years, I think it's 200 years after this, that Croatia has to reclaim its own language, right? Because they've been completely forced to not speak their own language. And there's tons of places like this where they've erased the capacity for the local people to know their own history. And they've brought in these new monasteries that are forcing new language. Raf, what's it called again?
What do you mean? What monastery? I just had another thought.
The Austrian language school.
I'm not sure what you mean.
The guy whose son is into UFOs, and he started a language school, or his grandfather.
Berlitz. Charles
It's
Berlitz, and then Maximilian Berlitz, because the one founded a language school, and the other guy popularized the Roswell idea. And just another red flag, because you mentioned Kirchner, or Kirche as a Jesuit. This is one of the guy consistently referenced by Manly Palmer Hall in Teachings of All Ages, because it was like the first book I read where they talk about older books, and I was like, what is all of this stuff? And this Kirche guy came up repeatedly. So just if there is something faulty there, of course it gets carried forward, and after 100 years you can take it as the canon, even though maybe it's part forgery or who knows. Yeah,
right. And also the apotheosis of Caesar, because like this idea that we're turning our leaders into gods, and also just like the mechanisms of Constantinianism, because Constantine converts on his deathbed, which sets the precedent for Christianity to be about sinners who can convert on their deathbed, right? It's basically the point. It's the thing where like you can live forever, you can be atoned. We've murdered this guy. But and also just the idea though, like it has to do with the state.
Lamentum of the Caesars.
Oh, right. Yeah. and that sacrifice becomes atonement through paying tariffs and taxes, like the right of Melchizedek. This idea that they can take taxes from you is associated with the Mithra cult thing. Is amazing thinking about Mithra, because all of the this is a really touchy subject for a lot of Catholics, particularly because they have converted, like you said, the word converted is a good word, by converting pagans into Corpus Christi. They've adapted and they've taken a lot of those myths with them and with their mothers, right? Like these things are like the grandmother's wives' tales and things like that, but they've ended up in Christianity. I saw something earlier I wanted to share. I forget where I put it. Oh, here, check this out. This is the Barlam and Josaphat. And so these are the Buddha saints. This is literally the Saint Gautama Buddha. The efforts the Catholic Church has done. This is how far it's gone. Just so you understand, like Buddha's freaking a saint. Just I want you to understand that about how. So it matters when you try to look at history and what they're saying. When did Buddha happen, right? Because now Buddha is literally a saint. So you have to understand that matters to the chronology of the Jesuits, and they're going to start making stories about it. And when you read it, imagine if China wasn't so big. Imagine if there wasn't that many people that knew the story of Buddha. You'd only know that Saint Buddha existed and that Saint Buddha happened at the time that the Catholics told you. So I find that that's exactly right. Like that's part of the whole new chronology thing that's going down. Eleazar being the high priest succeeding his father Aaron is really interesting because this is all about the Aaronic priesthood. These are the guys who can take the sacrifices. This is the Cohen priesthood, right? So they're able to do the sacrifices, the red heifer, they need to have the tabernacle or a temple. And without a temple, they're this is why today Cohens are lawyers, because they can't perform sacrifices, and it goes back to Eleazar. So if that's going on since the 15th, 17th century, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, that ties right into the Hasidic Jew thing. Also, talking about the sacking of Rome, because the sacking of Rome is really important. Just this idea that Charles V was able to control the Holy Roman Church and to take Rome, and just the context of what Rome was like at the time, right? Because you had still these Saturnian, Saturnian priesthoods that were existing, which are, come on, that's exactly what we're looking at today. It's been hidden better since that point, but that's immediately around the point of the first, I would call this the first Jesuit suppression.
These paintings, Italian 16th century, Netherlands 17th century, they're all 19th century.
Right. So I mean, that's I mean, yeah. This is maybe you get some woodcuts about the idea. They're pretty good. But yeah. So and Bruno, because this also kicks off the scientific revolution, but really what it does is it solidifies the idea that the church is able to make a paradoxical reality. And that's the Nicene Creed. And that's all that this seems to be. If you look at the time period, it seems right around this period, they start killing people and demanding that it's a militant Christian period. They demand you believe, if you're part of a heretic or heresy, which is just to be in a philosophical school of thought. Heresies, as we said, means to be able to choose in Greek. So if you're able to choose, then you're evil because you're not in line with the Catholic Church. And so then you've got Galileo's paradox, this whole the error really of saying that the church is allowed to continue on not existing in reality, which then lets science become its own religion in and of itself. And then we have new calendars that emerge at that point. Literally at that point, you start to see the Gregorian reforms emerge. And so also just Easter, the idea of Astarte in Easter, and this connection is very important because the Indo-Aryan connection, we keep looking at how Odin is Shiva, right? Because this is the same concept that's moved across the Indo-Aryan plane. And for Astarte to be like this goddess character, well, we've also talked about Ashera. Ashera is the wife of Yahweh, or as we look at the original version of the Semitic god, right? So Allah is Yahweh and Asherah. It's El-Aya. It's like he, she. So it's this idea of like the completion of the duality of God. So it's also interesting here because it's like it continues that. And I wanted to bring up like the Palestine, Israel. Another name for it was Diocletianopolis, right? There's a point when it was Diocletianopolis.
Diocletianopolis. Oh,
Yeah, kind of. This is just a Croatian thing, but I just like that. I just a good job. At one point, the Croatians got to name Israel, and we had a
he
way
had it
cooler
nice
name,
split.
Diocletianopolis. I love it. That's not bad at all. Cool guy, Diocletian. We don't even talk too much about Diocletian, but he did like do a lot. There's so much history there, and so this is the paradox of Christianity when we talk about St. Peter coming to Rome and the likelihood that he didn't really do it, right? Because at the time that they found these graves, we've done all the testing. There's no way that this is the bones of St. Peter. They know this, and there's no evidence that St. Peter ever went to Rome. But if there was a guy that we're calling St. Peter that came to Rome, maybe the 13th century or something like 15th century, that starts to add up to the Fomenko timeline. And even if you're using just the regular timeline, you're looking at the 3rd century, you're looking at Diocletian's period. This is a reasonable idea. Now, I mean, it doesn't really matter. It doesn't matter which Caesar is torturing Christians. It can easily be earlier Caesar. But at the end of the day, it doesn't make sense to torture a guy upside down. And examples like Diocletian was really good at torturing Christians. Like he would make it a show. You would go see it. You would want to see it, even if you were like, that's insane. They've got him in like a balloon, and they're just like hitting him. I mean, that's why we remember martyrs. Essentially, is because they were shot with 30, 40 arrows. Saint Sebastian right here is talking to Diocletian right before he's going to get put on a tree and shot with like 33 arrows. Right, so. There's no reason that St. Peter would be hanged upside down on a crucifix because you would lose the blood flow and die suffocating really quickly. So it would be a really boring show. So all of these myths we have about St. Peter seem to dissipate when you think about the practicality of what they were really all about and what they were trying to do, if that's what they were trying to do, right? Because now we're also presupposing that we know like that any of that's true. These are just stories that were told from the 19th century. Like we're talking about Saturnalias from Victor Hugo. But yeah, Council of Trent, everyone's wearing ash black. Something happened there where they become Shivites, and like the red and white, like we talked about Alameda Mascara yesterday. I don't know. That's basically my thought. I like the idea. I'm glad you're trying to take different chronologies and mix them together. Raph, if you have any questions, also I was going to look through the comment section and see what people have said.
Yeah, I got too many questions. What could definitely help is any type of graphics, if that is at all even possible, or just, I don't know, showing different type of timelines simultaneously or something like that. Because all I sense in my mind is like the cognitive dissonance of trying to match it all. And that's, of course,
very much time.
Yes, I'm sure it does. Yeah, I'm sure it does.
Yeah. But we have Google AI now, right?
One question that was not asked.
That's a job for AI, actually. Yes.
Open AI. Thank God Sam's back.
Regarding to the modern Hasidim, which are very religious people, I would turn to the Jewish Enlightenment around 1770, led by Moses Mendelssohn. It was a time of split of the Polish Jewish and German Jewish, because you had the Frankists, or Jacob Frank, who converted to Roman Christianity at the time, around 1773, I think, 1775. That was maybe a 5-year lap of time. And in the same time, it was the elevation of modern Judaism with the Hasidim. But it was the modern Hasidim, which were different from ancient Hasidim. Possibly there was an involvement of the Rothschild at the time. That's a possibility I did not dig. I will do probably later.
Have you looked much into the Zabbateans?
Elizabethines?
Yeah.
Really?
Zabbatian. Zabbatai Levi. Zabbatai Ziva, yeah. I mean, this is a thing I think would also be interesting to check into a lot.
Must be said about Zabbatai Zivi and Jacob Prong is that they do not follow the law of Israel. They follow the law of Esau, and they have their own gospels, which Martin Luther said they are somewhat a mockery of Jesus Christ. This is not true. They are true gospels, these how do they call them? Don't remember the name, but they have the gospel of their own. Jesus was a magician. In my opinion, these guys are basically Christians. They're not Jews, as Gershom Scholem would have liked they were. In my opinion, they're identical to Eastern Jesuits because their reference, intellectual reference, was a guy named Isaac Luria, and his life is totally identical to the life of the founder of the Jesuits in the West, which is called who's called Ignatius of Loyola. Ignatius of Loyola, Isaac Luria. It's the same guy.
Interesting. Okay. All right. That's interesting. All right. Well, then we'll have to look into them more. I think that's the thing to do. And some of the questions here, someone's been saying, why do you claim myths
That's
all
the name
the
of the
time?
Gospels of the Sabbatheans.
Here's a one in cap locks. I love cap locks. Why do you claim myths all the time? All here can barely define what is going on in the Middle East today. How are you going to know the past? Okay, well, that's ironically why the Middle East is happening. Gianna, thanks a lot. This is why we got to get it figured out eventually, or else it's just going to keep happening this way. That's kind of the point, I think. But also, yeah, it's interesting because if all of these myths, as you're saying, are myths, this is supposed to be history, right? Like that. I mean, as far as we know, this is the historical record, and so we're trying to say the likelihood of the historical record being accurate is so inaccurate that you're already accepting it as a myth. So that's already saying something. And for us to try to put that into a historical perspective, I agree, is laughable. It's almost impossible. But that's what we have to do if we want to find out where we are or what we are or who we are or how we are going to move forward. I think that's basically why. Looking for more comments. You can answer more of that if you want.
Or maybe just from your point of view, Didier, how would you say, why are you interested in this field even at all for you, or why you consider it relevant? Because to spend so much time and compare all of this means that you have a high motivation for whatever reason. Maybe you just want to explain that if people are interested.
This is like everyone, I think. When you have a passion, it grabs you. I'm very interested in truth in general, and this was a field I thought I had things to bring, because I read Fomenko and thought it did not dig deep enough in certain directions that I had in mind, and I had conclusions that were different from his, and I could bring new perspective to. I would not call it new chronology because it's copyrighted, but the field of the reworking chronology in more modern years. I don't know what word could you use for it. I use the word recentism, but I don't know how.
Present. I think presentism. I think is what they
presentism.
like.
Yeah, possibly. I will find a word that sounds in English. We use the word ressentisme en français, in French, but I don't know if it works in other languages.
Yeah, I guess recentism would work. Yeah. So you basically, it was because you were just interested in, I guess you want to know, because many people, of course, they say, oh, whatever, who cares? And of course, it's especially difficult because if Fomenko is maybe the one more well-known that gives an alternative story, you start looking into it. And of course, you also find shortcomings there. Then, of course, you're off to your own research. And yeah, I mean, I want to thank you for starting, to present this in this way and start collating it. I hope people can benefit. And as it continues, I'm sure, more people will look into it and it will become more and more easier to digest. And, maybe, yeah, I know designing graphics is difficult. But who knows? Maybe, Andreas, we can really set up an AI to do that. If we
Yeah,
feed it all
I
the
think-
data, maybe we can get the AI to draw a nice map.
I already have some thoughts. Yeah, we'll do something cool. Definitely. Awesome. All right. Well, also, where can they find more of your? Do you have content out now? Is there a place that they can go to find more of your material?
What did you say?
Do you have a place that they can find more of your content? Do you have a YouTube and?
Oh, I do not post videos very often, and they are all in French. So if you can hear French, maybe you could go to the 93 Gin with 2 N, like
Yes,
the Arrow
at
Devil
Gin 93.
with a D. Yeah,
There
this
we
is this
go.
one.
I'm subscribed now. Yeah, and I'm pretty sure. Yeah, with these days, look at this. Google Translate immediately auto setting, so you can immediately go and get auto translated to English. If you guys
I
can't. speak-
advertised for a book I published in April of this year.
Oh, sweet.
It's all in French. If you want to translate it, come on.
Do you have a?
Yeah.
Is it available digitally?
Yes, there's an ebook version. It's all on Amazon.
Epic. So therefore, it can immediately be translated as soon as you hold it in your hand. So that's great. That means anyone can start reading it in any language now. Very cool. So yeah, make sure you follow 93 Gin. That's awesome. Thank you for taking the time to present all this. This is a really awesome presentation. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Andreas. Thank you,
And-
Raphael.
Thank you, Raph. Yeah. Thanks for putting
Thank
this
you
together.
very much, Didier. Thanks, Andreas.
Have a
Thanks
good night.
everyone for listening.
We'll see you guys later. Wednesday Ultra. Peace.
Hey, everybody, tune in to Recent Tartarians.
Recent Tartarians. Recent Tartarians. Tartarian. Recent Tartarian. Recent Tartarian.
Hey, everybody, tune in to Recent Tartarians.
Recent Tartarian. Recent Tartarian.